Welcome back to the safe house. Might be kind of a slow start. Just starting to drink my coffee. I was up all night reading. I couldn't sleep. I'd try to sleep. I'd read. Try to sleep. Read. Excuse me. So, why does everybody hate the Jews? Well, clearly not everybody does. But what we're going to talk about is why, Hitler's idea of expelling the Jews from Germany and furthermore Europe, I don't think that can be disputed. His intentions were this, and in the past we've talked about whether or not the final solution included extermination, which I believe Goebbels and Hitler both had made public claims of this. But some believe it was kind of like holding the Jews hostage, using them as leverage with Allied forces. Like, if you don't back off or if you don't stop this or that, we're going to start killing the Jews. Which boggles my mind to think about living through something like that. Or making those claims. But Hitler's plan to get rid of all the Jews in Germany, this was really nothing new. I mean, unless it was extermination, right? And I do believe that at the very least, some Jews were rounded up and killed. I do ask the question whether or not the final solution was to actually exterminate the Jews. It may be. I may find that. I'm still researching it. But if you study this much, you'll come across 109 countries that the Jews have been kicked out of, essentially. Now, I was reading some articles, just some random Google articles, and let me just say, be careful with Google. I further research things. Don't just read one article. Call me paranoid, but these algorithms, these search engines, you have to be careful. For instance, when I, about 4 years ago, would Google what is the definition of Jew, it would say descendant from descendant from Judah. And a Semite referred to language. It referred to linguistics and a group of languages that fell into a Semitic group, of which Arabic fell into. And not so much an ethnic identity. So, I mean, sure, I understand what Semitism or a Semite represents today, and that is equally important. But when I Googled what is a Jew, now it talks about falling within a religious group, an ethnic group, and really, in my opinion, the definition of a Jew is an ethnic group of which descends from Judah. Now, if you can practice Judaism and not be a descendant of Judah, but so things change. For what reason we could go down that rabbit hole, I suppose, but we're not going to today. We're going to talk about why have Jews been kicked out of so many countries? And I think there's a lot of credible evidence that it has been to the tune of 109 countries over 1,000 years. If you Google this, you'll read some things that the total number of 109 was National Socialist propaganda, or anti-Semitic propaganda trying to fuel the fire. look, that might be the case. One thing I will say, however, about these articles that make this claim is that they don't list the true countries. They don't give you an alternative number, and they don't give you a list of the countries to this alternative number. I have seen in documentaries that I have seen the 109 countries listed. So I suppose you could go back and do some research on these 109 countries. I have not done that. So to be fair, I have not done that. But at least they list them. These other, there's all kinds of stuff, I think, trying to downplay potentially the other side of the story. Again, I don't care what may have previously been done by the Jews. You can't exterminate people. You can't round them up because of their ethnicity and put them in camps. I am really against that. I hope I've made that clear so far. So, why were they kicked out of 109 countries? Well, it has been said that it's due to their lending practices. And if we go back and we study Christian doctrine and Hebrew doctrine, in the Christian doctrine, it forbids lending money with interest. And in the Judea doctrine, it does not. So why would there be a law like this in Christian doctrine? Well, I'm not an economist, and I'm sure somebody could give you a better answer, an economist or a theologian. But from what I understand, let's use, for instance, the United States and the Federal Reserve. And over the years, there has been, it has played a significant role in the history of the United States. At different times, a central bank, the Federal Reserve is a central bank, has been used, and other times it has been kicked out. Some say that the Civil War and the assassination of Abraham Lincoln had to do with his refusing to renew a 20-year charter with a central bank. I've got a book coming about that. We're going to learn more about that. It's an interesting thing. I have my doubts that the Civil War was actually fought over the idea or over the issue of slavery. I think it's most likely that because the South was so dependent on slavery, more so than the North, it was used as a tool to cripple the South. So we're not going to get into that. An interesting topic, though. We will talk about that at a certain date. But when the central bank, like the Federal Reserve, issues currency to a country, let's say that the Federal Reserve issues an easy number to calculate, easy number to talk about, $100 to the United States. Federal Reserve issues $100 to the United States with a 20% interest, say. So the United States now owes the Federal Reserve the $100 they borrowed plus 20% interest, which is $120. But in circulation in the United States, there is only $100. It's really impossible to pay that $120. So you're forever in debt. You're forever in debt. Furthermore, one of the other lending practices evidently invented by the Rothschilds, Mayor... Let's see, I wanted to actually read this quick quote by Mayor Amschel Rothschild. Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws. Mayor Amschel Rothschild, 1744 to 1812. So, I mean, this is a quote of a Rothschild, the creator of the Federal Reserve System. And furthermore, it's something called fractal reserve banking. So, when a bank has, again, an easy number, $100, they will lend out. What they noticed was that if they have all this money in the bank, and people come and go and get their money and deposit money and withdraw money, they noticed that people don't ever withdraw all the money out at the same time, and so they always have this pot of money or gold in this time. And so they found that if they have $100 in there, they can loan out 1,000. This is called fractal reserve banking. And what these things do so for instance, going back to my first point, that's the Federal Reserve or a central bank loaning money to a nation. And if other banks lent money in the fractal reserve fashion, nobody can ever pay this debt off completely. There is more debt owed than money in circulation. And I think that people would underestimate the effect this has on society. It always keeps the demand, the demand for money greater. Everybody's fighting over money to pay debts of which there is not money in existence to pay these debts. So this is why 109, half that, we're going to say 109. If somebody shows me a list of countries, rather than just say it's less than that, but not mention one country, we're going to go with that for now. If somebody knows differently or can give me the list of nations or a number of accuracy, please leave it in the comments. I would love that. But this has gone on for 1,000 years. And particularly in Christian nations, you have to remember that when the Romanovs were removed, when Tsar Nicholas was removed, Russia was a Christian nation. England was a Christian nation. Most of Europe was a Christian nation, if not all. I mean, depending on what period of time in history. So now we're talking about the National Socialists and the economic depravity in Germany after World War I. All had to do with banking and the reparations placed on Germany. So this was just a very severe part of history, sure. But this was a continuation of what had been happening for 1,000 years. And, depending on your sources, if you get on Google and just start Googling some stuff, I'm not saying you don't find accurate information on Google, but be careful with Google because there are inaccuracies on some of the first, things that come up on a search. There are lies. There are partial truths. We talked about partial truths, how they can be just as deceptive as an outright lie, leaving out part of the story. But you can easily find articles to say, that there was this false idea that the Jews helped create World War One, World War Two, that there's this false idea that Jews in banking and international banking are somehow trying to take over the world, and National Socialist doctrine was based on false ideas of Jewish banking and Jewish conspiracies. You know, I'm open to all kinds of opinions and ideas. There again, send me some links to information you found. But if you actually research this and you go back, I don't think those are strange claims. Now, again, just because I know the word anti-Semitic and anti-Semite gets thrown around, gets thrown around like my ex-girlfriend at a party, but this isn't really too much of a mystery, you know. Henry Ford. Henry Ford put out a newspaper which he lost money on. He charged very little for it. He issued it for, I think, about 10 years, essentially, you know, for free, pretty close to free, called the Dearborn Independent. It was a paper that he purchased. And I'm not going to say everything in that. I've not read everything. I'm not saying everything in that paper was true, accurate. I'm using this as an example to say that all through history, and through American history, there have been people that believed, prominent figures like Henry Ford, the richest man in America at one time. Fascinating character. Have believed that there was a group of Jews, not all Jews, but that there were a group of elite Jews that have ambitions to rule the world. And I believe this is true. Look, I don't even have to dislike them. This doesn't even have to be about disliking that it's happening. Or I certainly am not anti-Semitic and or dislike Jews. Again, some of my greatest friends are Jews. But I mean, you go all the way back to the Bible and the money changers when Jesus turned tables upside down, you know, and the Jews as the money changers in the Bible were, you know, I'm not super versed on that, but I have heard that comparison and that example as well. I'll study that and we'll talk about it. But this has been going on all through history. Henry Ford sent, on his own dime, hired journalists and sent them out into the world to investigate this idea. So this wasn't just something that he picked up, you know, in the neighborhood talking to anti-Semites. This was not about that. Henry Ford was reported to be very, very anti-war, that he was very against the First World War. He was very against the Second World War. And through these journalists, some of the findings was that there was an elite group of Jews that have been manipulating nations around the world, and that they had manipulated the world into war with the Great War, the First World War, and then later again with the Second World War. Some of the things, it has been said, I don't know, some of you may know what the protocols of Zion, protocols of the elders of Zion, is that this is a plan laid out for world domination. Now, there again, if you get on Google and Google this, you'll read very quickly, you'll pull up things that say, oh, this has been proven to be a hoax. It was put out there by anti-Semitics. That might be true. I can't tell you. But we're getting pieces to the puzzle here, and eventually, not all these people are just kooks. Winston Churchill, a journalist before his political career in the English Parliament, had written several articles about this. One, I think it's named The International Jew. There was a book put out by Henry Ford. It was a collection of articles from his newspapers over the course of many years, several years, called The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem. You'll notice he didn't say all the Jews in the world, the world's foremost problem. He specifies the international Jew, and they're talking about the banking, the network, people involved, the B'nai B'rith. Listen, in both these books that I'm reading right now, they talk about a World Jewish Congress. They talk about an English Jewish Congress, an American Jewish Congress. These are the people that they're talking about when they talk about the international Jew. They have set up a governmental system around many parts of the world consisting of congresses and congressmen that they vote, and they go through the, you might say, legislative process. They go through congressional processes and have congressional hearings and committees about issues around the world. Now, again, this doesn't even have to be about disapproving of this or disliking Jews because of this. It is certainly not that for me. This is simply about trying to understand the world around me accurately, and to do that, we've sorted through history, putting pieces of the puzzle together to see this. It's pretty fascinating, actually, as these pieces continue to come together, painting a picture. Why would the Jews have a World Congress? Why would the Jews have an American Congress? What do Congresses do? What are republics essentially made up of? These government bodies. So I don't think anybody, Henry Ford or Hitler, Goring, Goebbels, these people, Winston Churchill, I don't think that there's any question as to why they thought this. I think there's real substantial evidence here. Whether or not they were completely responsible for World War I or World War II, I'm learning about that. I'm not as versed on World War I as I am World War II. I'm doing that now. But look at things like the Balfour Declaration by Lord Balfour of the British Parliament. First three words of that declaration: Dear Lord Rothschild. Okay, Lord Rothschild was the owner of banks, of central banks. He issued currency to governments and kingdoms. And it's just like we read in this quote here. Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws. I think, you might say, well, if you're issuing a nation's currency, you have the leverage needed to dictate and manipulate laws. Dictate and manipulate wars and start wars. These are interesting things. Could you imagine what the world would be like if things like this like what we've learned about Henry Ford today and Churchill and World Congress. When was the last time you heard on Fox News or CNN and everything in between about the Jewish World Congress? When was the last time you were watching the news about the state of Israel committing genocide and they mentioned the World Jewish Congress? When have you ever heard about the Jewish World Congress or the American World Congress? You know, we know about Zionism now. That's a pretty common saying, phrase now, word. You know, when Israel, when the people, the Jews in Palestine in 1948 declared their independence under the first Prime Minister Ben Gurion, it was done on Rothschild Boulevard. The government, you know, the Senate, the Congress, building of Congress in Israel, I mean, it was funded by the Rothschilds. It was funded by the Rothschilds. And one of the reasons that the Zionists in the world and Zionists in Germany had to work with the National Socialists, of whom the National Socialists did not like Zionists. They considered them to be one of the contributing Jewish groups to this global conspiracy. But one of the reasons they had to work with them is because affluent Jews in Germany didn't want to leave. At the time, it was required that a Jewish person have the equivalent of $5,000 to go to Palestine and settle in Palestine, to colonize Palestine. And so you had to have money to do that. But the Jews in Germany that had money didn't want to leave. So there was a collaboration there between Zionists and National Socialists, which is an interesting relationship, you might say. So we're learning more about this, you know. Wouldn't it be interesting? What kind of world would we live in if these were the types of things that they talked about on the news? If they started telling more, not even the whole story, but just like a little bit larger of a sliver of the story. All we know so far really is what the information that they put out there about Israel is Jews were persecuted all over the world, and so we gave them their own country. Back off, let them continue their greater Israel project. You know, the whole Balfour Declaration, the Rothschilds, dear Lord Rothschild, the first three letters on the Balfour Declaration, the Rothschilds were involved in creating the City of London. The City of London is essentially, there are conflicting articles and conflicting information about this, but it's a sovereign nation of its own. It's the bankers' country, particularly, well, I'm not going to say particularly the Rothschilds. There are several very prominent bankers that I'm sure call the City of London home. But the Balfour Declaration was a way for them to use, they had this European Jew problem. They wanted Jews out of, not just Germany, okay? It was not just Germany that wanted Jews out. Parts of Russia, they were persecuted all over, and we talked about why. And isn't it interesting, you know, that they were kicked out of all these countries because of their banking practices, and the City of London is full of Jewish bankers, and or historically. And the Suez Canal is so strategic. This was a way for Britain and prominent, like the Rothschilds, to have a presence where they could secure the Suez Canal. It's like in the War of 1967, the Six-Day War. One of the things that happened was Egypt cut off Israel from using the Suez Canal. It could be said that that is why this happened. So the whole idea that this is about returning to their Holy Land is really nonsense. That is why there's so much disagreement amongst Jews, particularly amongst the ethnic, possibly non-practicing, and the Orthodox Jews, the people that are Jewish by ethnicity and by faith, because Jews don't return to the homeland until their Messiah comes. It's very, very clearly stated in their doctrine. So Zionism has nothing to do, not this Zionism that we see today, has nothing to do with their faith in God and them fulfilling prophecy. This has to do with money, power, strategy. And that's probably why, because I have my doubts that part of the prophecy of them returning to the homeland when their Messiah comes has to do with committing genocide. It doesn't say return to your homeland and expel everybody out. And then once you get there, continue to expand, known as the Greater Israeli Project, the Greater Israel Project, through force. It doesn't say go home and build an army and commit genocide and at all costs expand your colony. And that's what this is, you know. Some of us will have to agree to disagree. I wish no harm on anybody. I think that our only real true hope or answer to any of this is love, understanding, compassion, the ability to see through the lenses of somebody else instead of seeing them as a future terrorist, instead of seeing them as less than human from both sides. But we have to remember, when we start going down that road, whose fault is this? Why are the Palestinians so violent or pissed? It's because Israelis are occupiers. You know, and at a later date, we'll talk about the Ashkenazi Jew, the 13th tribe. That's a book that I'm going to start reading here. I've researched somewhat of the contents. But again, if we're talking about a promise to ethnic Jews that they can return to their homeland, there's some real question as to whether these white European Ashkenazi Jews are even ethnic or descendants of Judah. There's a lot of evidence evidently out there to say that they are actually descendants of Khazarians, the kingdom which was conquered by the Russians in 900, I forget exactly. So I think their reign was between like 600 and 900 AD. So, you know, listen to Benjamin Netanyahu and let it go in one ear and out the other, because that guy is diabolic. I'm sorry, but all these Christians out there that think that they're supporting Jews going back to their homeland need to probably stop listening to whatever guy at the pulpit is preaching at them and read the Bible for themselves. Not that I am a theologian, but I've read enough and I know enough about the history of this to know that if you're a Christian and supporting Jews in Israel because you think somehow it was God-given birthright to them, then you don't truly understand what's going on and you're being duped. Like, subscribe, leave a comment below. Please leave a comment below. Let me know. Give me some feedback. Let me know what you think. Thank you again. Until next time.